I submitted my resignation letter that morning, convinced it would finally end everything. But when I looked up at Gilbert, he was smiling. Not the polite smile a normal boss gives a departing employee. This was the dangerous kind that said, "You're not going anywhere." My fingers gripped the paper tightly as I tried to avoid his gaze. But his presence was so overwhelming that ignoring him felt impossible. "So you're really leaving, Jake?" he asked, leaning back in his leather chair as if this were all some amusing game. I could only nod because if I started speaking I might reveal feelings I'd buried deep. Gilbert Haze, ruthless CEO, calculated businessman, and the man I desperately needed to escape from, whether my heart agreed or not. 2 years ago when I arrived here, I was just a simple finance analyst struggling to pay bills and survive in an expensive city. Gilbert had personally interviewed me and hired me on the spot, something I later realized he rarely did. The first few months were professional with appropriate distance maintained. But then gradually he started summoning me closer. Late-night meetings that only involved the two of us, business dinners that never discussed business, but instead focused on my personal life, my preferences, my dreams and fears. The intensity in his eyes made me nervous, but what scared me more was realizing I was becoming attracted to him too. "You've been ignoring my calls for 3 weeks straight," he said, rising from his desk and moving dangerously close to where I stood. I instinctively tried stepping backward, but his desk blocked my path, trapping me. "I'm not ignoring anything," I managed to say, attempting to sound confident despite my racing pulse. "I just need a fresh start somewhere else. That's all." He released a slow, predatory laugh as though I'd told the most ridiculous joke imaginable. "A fresh start? Jake, do you actually believe you can simply walk away from me?" The possessiveness dripping from his voice had always made me uncomfortable, and it was precisely why I was escaping this toxic situation. I'd made the decision to resign, to extract myself from this dangerous dynamic, but first I needed clarity about whether I was truly leaving Gilbert behind or merely running from my own conflicting emotions. Gilbert reached forward and touched my jaw for barely a second, but that brief contact felt like fire against my skin, sending electricity through my entire body. "Don't you dare touch me," I said sharply, jerking my head away from his hand with more force than necessary. His smile only deepened, as if my anger somehow entertained him or proved something he already knew. "You'll come back to me, Jake. They always do." I grabbed my bag and walked out without another word, but his voice echoed in my mind for the rest of that endless day. I understood then that this escape wouldn't be as simple as I'd naively hoped it would be. The next morning I began packing my apartment. New city, new company, new life. Everything planned perfectly down to the smallest detail. But that night when I checked my phone before bed, I saw a message that made my blood run cold. "Running away won't save you. I'll find you wherever you go. GH. I threw my phone aside in frustration and growing fear. This wasn't ending. Perhaps it was only just beginning. The following week passed in a blur of packing boxes, forwarding addresses, and finalizing arrangements with my new employer across the country. I'd accepted a position at a mid-sized marketing firm, completely different from the finance world I'd known, hoping the career shift would make me harder to track. My friends threw me a small farewell gathering, asking why I was leaving so suddenly, but I couldn't explain the real reason. How could I tell them that my former boss had become dangerously obsessed, that his attention had shifted from professional interest to something far more disturbing? They wouldn't understand the subtle threats, the way he'd appear wherever I went, the gifts that kept arriving at my door despite my repeated rejections. The night before my flight, I stood in my empty apartment surrounded by sealed boxes, feeling both relief and an unsettling sadness I couldn't quite name. My phone buzzed with a final message from an unknown number. "Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. Distance means nothing to me." I deleted it immediately, refusing to let Gilbert's words poison this new beginning I'd fought so hard to create. At the airport the next morning, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there with that knowing smile. But he wasn't there. Maybe I really had escaped after all. The flight felt endless despite being only a few hours. I spent the time rehearsing how I'd introduce myself to new colleagues, imagining a normal work environment without constant surveillance and uncomfortable attention. I'd rented a small apartment sight unseen, trusting the photos online, desperate to establish myself quickly before Gilbert could discover my location. As the plane descended toward my new city, I felt genuine hope for the first time in months. This was my chance to rediscover who Jake actually was without Gilbert's shadow consuming everything. My first evening in the new city was disorienting. Unfamiliar streets, different accents, the strange quiet of a neighborhood where nobody knew my name or history. I unpacked only essentials that night, too exhausted for anything more, and collapsed into bed with a sense of accomplishment. I'd done it. I'd actually broken free from Gilbert's gravitational pull. Sleep came easily for the first time in weeks, untroubled by anxiety or the feeling of being watched. Tomorrow would be my fresh start, the beginning of a life that belonged only to me. But at 3 a.m, my phone lit up with a notification that shattered my peace. Another message, this time with a photo attached, a picture of my new apartment building taken from across the street. Below it, just 2 words, "Sleep well." My hands trembled as the reality crashed over me like ice water. He already knew where I was. He'd probably known from the moment I accepted the new position. Every choice I'd made, every careful plan had been visible to him all along. I sat in the darkness of my unfamiliar bedroom, understanding with devastating clarity that Gilbert Haze never let go of anything he considered his. And somehow, impossibly, he'd decided that I belonged to him. The rest of that night I couldn't sleep, watching shadows move across my walls, jumping at every small sound from the hallway outside. By dawn I'd convinced myself I was overreacting, that the message was just Gilbert's final attempt to maintain control, that he couldn't possibly follow through on his implied threats. I had to believe that. The alternative, that I'd never truly escape him, was too terrifying to accept. So I showered, dressed in my new business casual attire, and headed to my first day of work with determined optimism, forcing myself to believe that today everything would be different, that this city would offer the sanctuary I desperately needed. I was wrong about everything. My first day in the new city felt surreal, like waking from a long nightmare into peaceful morning lights. I stood outside my new office building, admiring the sleek modern architecture with its glass walls reflecting the sunrise, thinking that there, finally, Gilbert's shadow wouldn't reach me. Here I could breathe without someone constantly monitoring my every move. But as I entered and began meeting my new colleagues, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, an instinct whispering that something was terribly wrong. My new manager, Carter, seemed excessively friendly and welcoming. "Jake, right? Your resume was outstanding. We're genuinely fortunate to have you," he said enthusiastically while shaking my hand. I smiled back, desperately hoping this would truly be the fresh chapter I needed. The first week progressed smoothly. Interesting projects, a cooperative team, coworkers who were genuinely pleasant without hidden agendas. I began believing I'd finally made the right decision, that my careful planning had paid off and I'd successfully escaped the toxic environment I'd left behind. But then Friday afternoon arrived, and as I worked quietly at my desk, an urgent company-wide email notification appeared on my screen. The subject line read, "Major company acquisition, immediate effect." I clicked it casually, expecting some routine corporate announcement about partnerships or minor organizational changes. When I read the email's contents, the ground seemed to vanish beneath me. "We are thrilled to announce that our company has been acquired by Haze Global Enterprises, effective immediately. Our new CEO, Gilbert Haze, will personally oversee all operations moving forward." I read it once, then twice, then 3 times, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake. Haze Global Enterprises? Gilbert? My entire body went numb, my hands beginning to shake uncontrollably as the horrifying reality sank in. The coworker sitting beside me noticed my distress. "Dude, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost or something." I couldn't respond, could only stare blankly at my screen as my phone buzzed with an incoming message from a private number. "Surprise, Jake. Did you really think I'd let you go that easily? See you Monday morning. Don't be late." My heart began racing so fast I could barely breathe, my vision narrowing as panic set in. This was calculated, meticulously planned. Gilbert had actually purchased an entire company just because I worked here. His obsession had crossed into territory I hadn't thought possible, even for him. I spent the weekend locked in my apartment, unable to process the insanity of what had happened. I considered calling friends back home. But what would I even say? My psychotic former boss literally bought my new company to trap me here. Nobody would believe such absurd behavior from a respected business executive. Sunday night I lay awake staring at my ceiling, dreading Monday's inevitable confrontation. When morning finally arrived, I noticed a luxury black sedan parked near the building's main entrance. His signature vehicle. My stomach dropped. I walked inside and headed straight to my desk, clinging to the desperate hope that somehow this was all a terrible dream. But around noon, when an emergency all-hands meeting was announced, I knew there would be no escaping reality. When I entered the conference room, he was there. Gilbert Haze stood at the front wearing a sharp gray suit, his trademark expression mixing cold professionalism with something darker, more possessive. The entire office sat quietly, waiting for his introduction speech. I took the corner seat farthest from him, attempting to become invisible among my new colleagues. But the moment he began speaking, his piercing gaze swept directly to me and stayed there. "Good morning, team. I'm Gilbert Haze, and I'm genuinely excited about this new venture we're embarking on together," he said in that smooth, confident tone I knew too well. "I believe in hands-on leadership, in personally knowing every valuable member of this organization." He paused deliberately, his eyes never leaving mine as he continued, "Especially the exceptionally talented ones who bring unique value to our team." Polite applause rippled through the room, but I sat frozen, recognizing the threat hidden within his seemingly professional words. After the meeting concluded and people began dispersing, Gilbert suddenly called out, "Jake, my office, right now." His tone left no room for negotiation or delay. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs carried me forward anyway toward the elevators. His new office occupied the entire top floor. Of course it did. The door closing behind me sounded like a cell door slamming shut. "Sit down," he commanded, settling into his executive chair with casual authority. I remained standing. I'd rather stand, actually. He gave an amused smile and walked around his desk until he stood directly in front of me. "Still defiant, I see. That's what I've always admired about you, Jake." I clenched my fists, fighting to maintain composure. "This is beyond insane, Gilbert. You bought an entire company just to keep you exactly where you belong?" "Yes, Jake. I did precisely that," he interrupted without hesitation or shame. "And I'd do it again without a moment's regret. 100 times over if necessary." I looked into his eyes and saw he was completely serious. His obsession had reached a dangerous level that terrified me. "You need help, Gilbert. Professional psychiatric help." He released a low, dark laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Perhaps I do. But until I decide to seek that help, you're staying right here, with me, where I can see you every single day and know exactly where you are." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. He'd essentially trapped me here, used his wealth and power to create a cage I couldn't escape. I thought about quitting again, but where would I go? He'd already proven he could track me down and manipulate my employment situation. He demonstrated that distance meant nothing, that his resources were virtually unlimited. "This isn't love, Gilbert," I said quietly, desperately hoping to reach whatever rational part of him might still exist. "This is imprisonment. This is control. You're not protecting me or caring for me. You're suffocating me." For just a moment something flickered across his face. Maybe doubt, maybe pain, but it vanished so quickly I couldn't be sure I'd actually seen it. "Call it whatever you want, Jake," he said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "But you're mine now. The sooner you accept that reality, the easier this will be for both of us." He returned to his desk, dismissing me with a casual gesture. "You can go back to work now. We'll have dinner tonight to discuss your new role on my executive team. I'll send a car to pick you up at 7. Don't even think about refusing." I walked out of his office in a daze, knowing my nightmare had only just begun. The following days became psychological torture as avoiding Gilbert became virtually impossible. He materialized everywhere I went, suddenly appearing in hallway conversations, coincidentally joining meetings I attended, always watching with that knowing expression. Carter, who had been my direct manager, now reported to Gilbert and had officially transferred me to something called the CEO's Special Strategic Team. Everything was clearly calculated to keep me in Gilbert's orbit constantly. Wednesday afternoon, while I quietly worked on reports at my desk, my phone lit up with a message. Lunch with me. My private office. 1 o'clock sharp. This isn't a request. I tried ignoring it and focusing on my work, but exactly at 1 o'clock, Gilbert's personal assistant appeared beside my desk. Mr. Haze is expecting you upstairs, Jake. He specifically insisted I personally escort you, she said with a polite but firm smile that indicated refusal wasn't an option. I knew arguing was pointless, so I followed her to the elevator and rode up to the executive floor in uncomfortable silence. When I entered Gilbert's private office, the scene before me made me stop in the doorway. This wasn't a simple office lunch setup, it was an elaborate fine dining arrangement. Expensive Italian cuisine was perfectly plated on fine china. Crystal wine glasses sat waiting, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Even candles flickered on the table. You didn't have to do all this, I said, deliberately staying near the door. Sit, Jake, Gilbert said with quiet authority, already seated and gracefully pouring wine into both glasses. I sat reluctantly but didn't touch the food. Gilbert immediately noticed. Not hungry? Or are you just being stubborn to prove some point? I met his eyes directly. What do you actually want from me, Gilbert? Because this, I gestured at the elaborate setup. This isn't normal workplace behavior. He set down his glass and leaned across the table, bringing his face closer to mine. I want you to stop pretending we don't have something powerful between us, something that terrifies you. My heartbeat accelerated, but I kept my voice steady. There's nothing between us. You were my boss. That's all this ever was. Everything else exists only in your imagination. He laughed slowly, as if I'd told an absurd joke. Is that what you tell yourself when you can't sleep at night, Jake? That you felt nothing when I touched you? That your pulse doesn't race when you hear my voice? Anger finally overrode my caution and I stood abruptly. You're delusional. I left specifically because you're dangerously obsessed with me. This entire situation, buying the company, trapping me here, proves exactly how unstable you are. Gilbert also rose and came around the table until we stood face to face, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Maybe I am obsessed, he said slowly. Deliberately. But so are you, Jake. Otherwise you wouldn't fight against this so desperately, wouldn't get so emotional. Indifference doesn't require this much effort. I reflexively pushed against his chest, but he didn't move an inch. Don't touch me again without my explicit permission, I warned. Though my voice lacked the strength I intended, Gilbert gently but firmly caught my wrist in his hand. You're terrified, Jake. Not of me but of yourself. Of admitting what you actually feel beneath all this denial. I jerked my hand free with considerable effort. I feel absolutely nothing for you except resentment and disgust. He invaded my personal space further, moving close to my ear until his warm breath brushed against my skin. Liar, he whispered, his voice carrying a dangerously seductive quality that made my treacherous body respond despite my anger. I shoved him away forcefully and practically ran from his office, heading straight to the building's restroom on a lower floor where I could lock myself in and catch my breath. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I saw my face was completely flushed, my hands visibly trembling. I felt frustrated with myself beyond measure. Why were his words affecting me so intensely? Why couldn't I honestly tell him that maybe some part of me was actually attracted to him despite knowing how wrong it was? When I finally returned home that evening, I found another premium gift box waiting outside my apartment door. Inside was my favorite designer watch that I'd lost at the old company months ago. The attached note read, "Found this in my old office drawer. You left many things behind, Jake, but I kept everything, preserved every trace of you, because I never let go of what belongs to me. G.H." I threw the watch against the wall in frustration, hearing something inside it crack. This nightmare showed no signs of ending. The more distance I tried creating, the closer he managed to get, and the most terrifying part, I genuinely wasn't sure anymore if I truly wanted to escape him. That night I lay awake analyzing everything, trying to separate genuine fear from unwanted attraction, manipulation from real connection. Gilbert was clearly unstable, his behavior crossing every professional and personal boundary imaginable. He'd literally purchased a company to prevent me from leaving him. That was textbook obsessive behavior. Yet some irrational part of me felt flattered, wanted. No, that was the manipulation talking, his psychological games working exactly as he'd designed them. I couldn't let myself fall into that trap. I had to stay clear-headed and remember that this wasn't romance, it was control dressed up as devotion. The next morning I arrived early, hoping to avoid him, but found a sealed envelope on my desk. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long. Gilbert's precise handwriting detailed everything: how he'd noticed me the moment I walked into my interview 2 years ago, how he'd watched me grow professionally and become increasingly captivated by my mind and spirit, how he'd fought against his feelings until they became overwhelming. He wrote about the exact moment he realized he couldn't let me go, described the panic he'd felt when I submitted my resignation, explained his frantic acquisition of my new company as a desperate act rather than a calculated move. The letter ended with a single line: "I know this is wrong. I know I should let you go. But I can't. I'm sorry, Jake. But I simply cannot." I sat staring at those words for a long time, my emotions in complete chaos. This letter revealed a vulnerability I'd never seen from him before, suggested that beneath the controlling behavior was someone genuinely struggling with feelings he didn't know how to handle appropriately. But that didn't excuse his actions. Being emotionally damaged didn't give him the right to trap me, to manipulate my career and life to suit his needs. I had to stay strong, had to maintain my boundaries no matter how much his words affected me. I folded the letter and locked it in my desk drawer, determined to pretend it didn't exist. But I knew I'd be thinking about those words for days to come, analyzing every sentence for hidden meanings, wondering if somewhere beneath the obsession was something real that might be worth exploring. I hated myself for even considering it. Friday evening arrived with the office nearly empty, and I was preparing to leave when Gilbert's voice crackled through the intercom. "Jake, come upstairs immediately before you leave." My first instinct was to ignore it completely, but Carter passed by my desk and said quietly, "Hey man, he's been asking for you all afternoon. Better not delay." I released a frustrated sigh and grabbed my bag, knowing this confrontation could no longer be avoided. When I entered his office, he stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows with the city's evening lights creating a dramatic silhouette behind him. He didn't initially look at me when he spoke. "Close the door behind you." I shut it but deliberately maintained my distance. "What do you want now, Gilbert?" I asked directly, exhaustion evident in my tone. He finally turned slowly to face me, and for the first time, his expression held something unexpectedly different. Perhaps exhaustion, perhaps genuine frustration, perhaps something deeper. "Why do you hate me with such intensity?" he suddenly asked, and the question was so unexpected that I momentarily couldn't speak. "What?" I asked in disbelief. "You heard me perfectly," he said, taking slow, deliberate steps toward me. "I've given you everything conceivable, promotions beyond your experience level, exclusive opportunities others would kill for, my undivided attention, and still you run from me like I'm your worst nightmare. I need to understand why." I clenched my jaw, struggling to control the emotions threatening to overflow. "Because you suffocate me, Gilbert. You don't give. You consume everything in your path. You buy entire companies, manipulate every situation to your advantage, control people's entire lives without their consent. You honestly think that's love? That's textbook psychological obsession." He gave a bitter smile after hearing my words, shaking his head slightly. "Perhaps it is obsession, but at least I'm brutally honest about what I feel. What about you, Jake? You perform this victim act so convincingly, but you've been lying to yourself from day one." Anger propelled me forward. "I'm not lying about anything." "Yes, you absolutely are," he said firmly, now standing dangerously close. "You lie every single time you look at me and pretend you don't feel this magnetic pull between us. You lie every time you walk away and pretend it doesn't destroy something inside you." I pushed against his chest in frustration. "Stop it. Stop acting like you know what goes on in my head." But he stood firmly planted. Instead, he deliberately caught my hand and pressed it flat against his chest. "Feel that?" he said with intense focus, his rapid heartbeat pounding beneath my palm. "That's what you do to me. Every single day, every damn moment I'm conscious and breathing." I tried forcefully pulling my hand back, but he continued speaking. I acquired this company because the thought of you being beyond my reach was completely unbearable. I couldn't sleep properly, couldn't focus on anything important, couldn't function normally knowing you were somewhere out there, actively trying to erase me from your existence. The room held only the sound of our heavy breathing. I looked into his eyes. He was dangerously serious, raw honesty unmistakable in his gaze. You need psychiatric help, I said, though my voice came out unexpectedly weak. Maybe I do, he admitted, slowly taking my face in both his hands with a gentle yet firm hold. But if madness means fighting relentlessly for what I want, then I'll embrace it completely without apology. And then he did something I could never have anticipated. He kissed me intensely. I was completely shocked, frozen in place, but his lips pressed firmly against mine, simultaneously soft and demanding. For several seconds the entire world blurred around me, and I forgot this was Gilbert, forgot this was morally wrong on multiple levels. I involuntarily responded, my hands slowly moving to his neck, and that moment felt electrically intense, absolutely terrifying in its power. Then suddenly reality came crashing painfully back. I shoved him away with maximum force, stumbling backward. No, I said firmly, unconsciously touching my lips. This is completely wrong. This is real, he interrupted hoarsely, his voice raw and vulnerable. You felt it too, Jake. Don't you dare lie to me now when the truth is written all over your face. I quickly grabbed my bag and escaped from his office without saying another word. But internally my mind was complete chaos. Walking home I felt completely confused and emotionally wrecked. Did I genuinely hate him, or was I perhaps deeply attracted despite everything? And if I honestly felt something for him, was it already too late to explore it safely? Because given the desperate intensity of Gilbert's behavior, I clearly understood this was no longer merely one-sided obsession. This was rapidly becoming something dangerously powerful from both directions. And I genuinely feared I was losing control of myself completely. The weekend stretched endlessly as I replayed that kiss over and over, analyzing every sensation, every emotion that had surged through me. I barely ate, couldn't focus on anything, just paced my apartment like a caged animal. My phone remained silent. No messages from Gilbert, which somehow felt worse than his usual persistence. The silence felt loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. Was he respecting my boundaries for once? Or was this calm merely the eye of the storm? Sunday afternoon, I finally forced myself to go for a walk, needing to escape my apartment's suffocating walls. The city felt different somehow, as if my internal chaos had colored everything external. I found myself at a small park, watching couples walk hand in hand, families playing with children, normal people living normal lives. When had my existence become so complicated? When had I lost the ability to simply exist without this constant emotional turmoil? My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out with trembling hands. The message was short. I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But I meant everything I said. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I stared at those words, searching for manipulation, for the trap I'd learned to expect. But I found only what appeared to be genuine patience, genuine respect for my need for space. It confused me more than any of his previous actions had. That evening I sat on my apartment balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. I thought about my life before Gilbert. Simple, predictable, safe, and utterly lonely, if I was being honest with myself. I'd had acquaintances but no real friends, casual dates but no genuine connections. Then Gilbert had crashed into my existence like a meteor strike, destroying my carefully constructed walls, forcing me to feel things I'd spent years avoiding. Yes, his methods were problematic at best, potentially dangerous at worst. But beneath the obsession, beneath the control issues, was there something real worth salvaging? I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time I was asking the questions honestly instead of simply running away from them. And that shift felt significant. Felt like maybe the first step toward actually dealing with this situation rather than just escaping it. Tomorrow I would face him again at the office. Tomorrow I would need to make decisions about what came next. But tonight, I simply let myself feel everything, the fear, the anger, the confusion, and yes, the attraction I could no longer deny. Tonight, I stopped lying to myself about what was really happening between us. The entire weekend I remained in self-imposed isolation within my apartment, desperately trying to mentally process what had happened Friday night. Gilbert's unexpected kiss, his raw confession, and most disturbing, my own passionate response that I couldn't rationalize away. I had actually kissed him back enthusiastically, and now denying that reality was impossible. I spent long periods staring at my bathroom mirror, asking myself repeatedly whether I genuinely felt something for him or if his overwhelming intensity had simply temporarily consumed my better judgment. Sunday late night, a message arrived. We desperately need to talk. Properly, without office politics interfering. Come to my penthouse tomorrow after work. Please, Jake. I'm asking, not commanding. GH. This was literally the first time he'd ever used the word please in any context with me. I deliberately didn't reply, but internally I knew avoiding him forever wasn't realistic. Monday morning, the office held a strange energy. People were whispering that Gilbert had suddenly canceled multiple major client meetings without any explanation, which was highly unusual for his typically calculated behavior. Carter cornered me privately in the break room. Jake, seriously, do you know what's going on with Haze? He seems genuinely off somehow. People are worried about major deals falling through. I casually shrugged my shoulders. How would I possibly know what's going on with him? But obviously I knew the exact reason. He was mentally disturbed because I was deliberately ignoring him, avoiding his emotions and the conversation we both knew needed to happen. Throughout the day I strategically avoided him, deliberately skipping meetings where his presence was expected, eating lunch quietly at my desk. But when evening came and I tried quietly leaving the building, he was clearly waiting in the main lobby. Jake, he called softly, and surprisingly his usually commanding voice lacked the sharp edge that always characterized it. This tone was unusually soft, almost unexpectedly vulnerable in its gentleness. I reluctantly stopped, acutely aware that people were still around in the lobby and anyone could witness our interaction. Not here publicly, I said quietly, but firmly. He nodded in understanding. My car. 5 minutes. Please. I internally debated refusing, but exactly 5 minutes later found myself sitting in his luxury car's passenger seat. He drove silently with an expressionless face, and slowly we left the city limits completely behind. Where exactly are we going? I asked cautiously. Somewhere we can talk honestly without any interruptions or judgment from others. He answered simply. We arrived at a secluded cliff viewpoint where the entire city's lights spread breathtakingly far below us. He turned off the car engine and slowly turned to face me completely. I'm sorry, Jake, he said quietly, and these simple words were so shockingly unexpected that I literally couldn't respond initially. I'm genuinely sorry for everything, for buying the company to trap you here, for constantly pushing past your boundaries, that impulsive kiss that crossed every line. I looked at him carefully, seeing unmistakable sincerity in his usually guarded eyes. Then why did you do any of it? I asked directly. He took a deep, shaky breath as if gathering courage. Because I'm absolutely terrified, Jake. Terrified of losing you permanently from my life. I've never in my entire existence felt this intensely for anyone, and I genuinely didn't know how to handle it in any healthy way. So I pathetically controlled everything around us, foolishly thinking that would somehow keep you emotionally close to me. But obviously it catastrophically pushed you away instead. My chest tightened unexpectedly. This vulnerable Gilbert wasn't at all the man I typically knew. This was someone significantly more real, disturbingly more human and flawed. I honestly don't know what you genuinely want from me. I admit it. I want you to give me one real chance, he said seriously, gently holding my hand carefully in his. A genuine chance. No corporate power plays, no psychological manipulation games. Just us. If there's even an us worth exploring together. I surprisingly didn't immediately pull my hand away, but I also didn't give a clear answer. I'm scared, Gilbert, I finally admitted vulnerably. Deeply scared that you'll completely consume me until nothing of myself remains. That I'll entirely lose my identity in whatever this is between us. He slowly, reverently raised my hand to his lips, kissing it gently. I'm equally scared too, Jake. Scared that I've already lost myself completely in you and there's no going back. We both sat there silently, surprisingly comfortable in the quiet, And literally for the first time I genuinely realized that perhaps we shared exactly the same existential fears of completely losing control, of openly showing vulnerability, of being emotionally hurt by caring too much. He eventually drove me safely home, and when leaving he softly said, "Think carefully about everything. I'll patiently wait for your decision, however long it takes." I went inside completely emotionally exhausted and confused. But one fundamental thing felt clearly different. I could no longer simply hate Gilbert. Not anymore, not after seeing his raw humanity. The next day at work felt surreal. Gilbert maintained professional distance, never approaching me directly, never making eye contact during the morning meeting. It felt wrong somehow, this sudden absence of his attention that I'd complained about for so long. By afternoon I found myself actually missing his presence, which terrified me more than his obsession ever had. What did it mean that I wanted him to pursue me now that he'd stopped? During my lunch break I sat in my car in the parking garage, gripping the steering wheel and trying to understand my own contradictory feelings. I'd spent weeks desperate to escape him, and now that he was giving me space I felt abandoned, lost. The realization hit hard. Maybe I had been lying to myself about what I wanted. Maybe underneath all my protests some part of me had been responding to his intensity because it made me feel wanted in a way nothing else ever had. I pulled out my phone and stared at his last message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. What would I even say? That I was confused? That I might want to explore whatever this was between us? That I was terrified but also strangely intrigued? Before I could overthink it further, I typed quickly, "Your penthouse. Tonight at 8. We'll talk." I hit send before I could change my mind, then sat back, my heart racing. I'd made a choice, or at least taken the first step toward making one. Whatever happened next, I was walking into it with my eyes open, no more running away from the truth of what I felt. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and I spent the rest of the workday unable to focus on anything except what the evening would bring. 2 intensive days later, after countless hours of genuine self-reflection and internal debate, I finally solidified my decision. I deliberately went to Gilbert's penthouse, using the exclusive address he'd previously shared. When the door opened, I was surprised to see him casually dressed, literally the first time I'd seen him without his formal business armor. In a simple black shirt and jeans, he looked surprisingly approachable, almost normal. "You actually came," he said with genuine relief flooding his voice. I stepped carefully inside, and this personal space was surprisingly different from Gilbert's cold corporate persona. Unexpectedly warm, distinctly personal, carefully decorated with actual character. "I'm not here to immediately say yes to anything," I honestly clarified right away, "but I'm also consciously not here to definitively say no either." He nodded slowly, understandingly gesturing for me to sit on the comfortable sofa. "Then what exactly are you here for?" he asked. "To genuinely understand," I stated clearly. "To understand if this whatever complicated thing exists between us is authentically real or just your obsession psychologically projecting onto me." He sat seriously across from me, looking directly into my eyes with intense focus. "Ask me absolutely anything. I'll tell you the complete, painful truth regardless of how it makes me look." And so I asked literally everything I'd been wondering. His past relationship history, specifically why he exhibited such pathologically controlling behavior, whether he genuinely loved me or simply wanted to possess me like an object. He systematically answered every single difficult question, sometimes brutally honestly, sometimes painfully. "I was emotionally abandoned as a young child," he confessed rawly, "by people I desperately loved and trusted completely with my whole heart. So I psychologically learned to obsessively control everything surrounding me, to never let anything precious slip away uncontrollably again. And then you unexpectedly walked into my structured, controlled life, Jake. You who genuinely didn't care about my wealth or corporate power structure, who fearlessly challenged me intellectually without fear. And I absolutely didn't know how to healthily handle those feelings, except by desperately holding on tighter and tighter." His usually strong voice visibly cracked, and genuinely for the first time I saw him emotionally bare and completely vulnerable before me. I naturally, without consciously thinking about it, gently took his hand in mine, Gilbert, obsessively controlling me will never keep me close to you. It'll only inevitably push me further and further away. He desperately gripped my hand tightly. I know that now, and I'm actively trying to fundamentally change who I am. I've already started attending regular therapy sessions, Jake, because I absolutely don't want to lose you from my life. But I also genuinely don't want to be the primary reason you're chronically miserable. This sincere confession, this raw vulnerability he was showing, this was exactly what I desperately needed to see from him. I gently took his face in both my hands carefully. If we actually attempt this, it absolutely has to be completely equal between us. No corporate power games whatsoever. No buying companies to strategically trap me near you. He smiled genuinely and nodded seriously. Absolute deal, but I honestly can't promise I won't still desperately want to give you everything I possibly can. I also smiled softly, genuinely for the first time feeling honest around him. I don't want material possessions, Gilbert. I just want brutal honesty and genuine mutual respect. And then deliberately, consciously, I kissed him specifically this time entirely on my own choice, completely on my own terms without coercion. This kiss felt fundamentally different from the previous impulsive one. It was surprisingly gentle, carefully exploratory, authentically real in every way. When we eventually pulled apart naturally, he tenderly pressed my forehead to his lips and whispered, "I'll spend every single day proving I'm worth this chance you're giving me." I peacefully rested my head against his solid chest, listening closely to his steady heartbeat. "And I'll spend every day consciously learning to trust you again gradually, step by step." We both realistically understood this wouldn't be an easy journey. Trust needed to be painstakingly rebuilt. Clear boundaries needed to be firmly established. Deep-rooted fears needed to be bravely faced together. But genuinely, for the first time, I honestly thought perhaps this effort was truly worth attempting. Because when Gilbert held me vulnerably, completely honest and emotionally open without manipulation, I clearly realized that I also undeniably felt deeply for him. Perhaps I always had internally. We spent the rest of that evening talking, really talking about expectations, boundaries, what a healthy relationship between us might actually look like. Gilbert shared more about his therapy sessions, about the work he was doing to understand his control issues and their roots in childhood trauma. I shared my own fears about losing my independence, about being consumed by someone else's needs and desires. We made agreements. He would consult me before making any major decisions that affected my career or life. I would communicate openly when feeling suffocated instead of just running away. It felt strange, negotiating a relationship like a business contract, but also somehow right for us, establishing clear parameters within which we could both feel safe. "I need you to understand something," I said as the evening grew late. "I'm not some prize you won by pursuing me relentlessly. I'm choosing this, choosing you, because I see the person beneath the obsession. But if that obsession returns, if you start trying to control me again, I will leave. And next time, no amount of company acquisitions will bring me back." He looked at me seriously, no hint of amusement or dismissal in his expression. "I understand completely. And I respect that boundary absolutely. You have my word, and I know my word hasn't meant much to you lately. But I'm going to rebuild that trust action by action." The next morning when I arrived professionally at the office, superficially everything looked exactly the same, but fundamentally everything felt dramatically different. Gilbert gave me a completely professional, appropriate nod when we passed formally in the hallway, deliberately showing no extra personal attention publicly. But when I carefully opened my desk drawer, I discovered a handwritten note, "Dinner tonight, entirely your choice of place and timing. No pressure whatsoever. GH." I smiled genuinely, warmly, and significantly. For the first time I confidently replied, "Yes, 8 o'clock at Marino's," via text, because fundamentally this was now completely my conscious choice. Not desperately running away, but courageously staying and patiently seeing what we could realistically develop together. And when I thoughtfully glanced in his direction where he stood professionally in the conference room across the floor, he caught my eye and subtly, genuinely smiled. This was carefully our beginning, admittedly complicated and potentially messy, but it was authentically ours to build together. And honestly, for the first time, I felt genuinely, deeply content with my decision. Happy that I'd courageously switched jobs, because if I hadn't deliberately done that, we might never have reached this brutally honest place. We might never have become authentically real with each other. Sometimes you have to break completely apart before you can build something genuine, something worth keeping. And standing there in that office, looking at Gilbert across the room, I finally believed we might actually succeed at building exactly that.